$250 million. 721 Pokemon. 20 years. 6 generations. That, in a nutshell, is the legacy of the Pokemon franchise. Pokemon is the only franchise that after 20 years still has millions of people playing the games that first came out back in 1996. Even now, after 6 generations of Pokemon games, fans don't seem to be getting tired of the franchise. Instead, all we're asking right now is when is 7th generation coming out? So in honor of Pokemon's legacy and the unavoidable release of 7th gen at some point in the future, today I'm here to give you guys 10 things that I think will make 7th generation perfect. Number 1. A better rival. Remember back in 1st and 2nd gen when your rival was a complete douchebag? Because I do, and I freaking loved it. There was nothing more satisfying than beating up on your rivals back in those days, and at the same time, nothing more humiliating than losing to them. Unfortunately though, if you ask me, the rivals have only gotten worse throughout the generations. The 3rd gen rivals, for instance, absolutely sucked. Despite 3rd gen being my favorite, May and Wally are potentially the worst rivals of all time. So what I want in Gen 6 is a single rival who doesn't give you this positive reinforcement crap and is more like Blue from 1st gen. I also want Game Freak to really focus on fleshing out his or her character a lot more than in previous games. Number 2. No more freaking HMs. Look, I think we can all agree that HMs are just a huge annoyance these days, and I really wish Game Freak would do away with them. They're honestly nothing more than a hindrance at this point, and while the ability to use moves outside of battle is kinda cool, the HM mechanic in itself is too inconvenient and needs to be thrown away. With that said, I do think they should make it so that some moves can be used outside of battle and do cool things, but aren't necessary for the game as HMs were in the past. For instance, maybe make a rock climb TM that can allow you to get 1 or 2 interesting items, but nothing more. And Waterfall can give you access to some interesting areas, but isn't required to get to the Elite Four. Doing this would go a long way to making Pokemon a little bit less tedious and a lot more enjoyable. Number 3. Evolutions for older Pokemon. When I say I want evolutions for older Pokemon, what I mean is I want Game Freak to go back to Gens 1, 2, 3, and hell maybe even 4 to give some rather underwhelming Pokemon a much needed evolution. And just to clarify, I do not want these to be Mega evolutions. Megas are cool and all, but I think for the most part Game Freak should try and mix it up and not only do Mega evolutions for older gen Pokemon as was the case in X and Y. Specifically, I want to see regular evolutions for Farfetch'd, Unknown, Arcanine, Skarmory, Luvdisc, and Torkoal to name just a few, assuming none of these Pokemon get Megas before 7th gen comes out. Also, of course, we need more evolutions, because really, you can never have too many of those. Specifically, I definitely want to see a Ghost type and a Dragon type evolution in 7th gen. I could go on and on about this topic, but I think I've made my point, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave things here. Number 4. Improvements to the typing system. There are a few somewhat major changes that I want to see in the typing system for Generation 7. First of all, I feel like a lot of Rock-type Pokemon are severely underpowered, partly because Rock is weak to 2 incredibly common types in Water and Grass, and is often dual-typed with Ground, making Pokemon 4 times weak to Water and Grass, which is pretty much an insurmountable weakness. Also, Ice is a horrible typing defensively, and for that reason, Ice-type Pokemon tend to be sorely underused. It's weak to 5 types, which is way too much, and only resists 1 type itself. Lastly, Poison could also use some buffs, although I will admit that it's gotten a lot better with the introduction of Fairy types in Gen 6. So what I'm looking for is for Game Freak to make some major buffs to all of these types, such as perhaps removing some of their weaknesses defensively and increasing their number of resistances. Or at least in some way making them better than they are now. Finally, I'll be honest and say that I have slightly mixed feelings on this next issue, but I think it would be interesting if they introduced an all-new type once again. A lot of people have been theorizing about the sound type in 7th gen since we have so many sound moves in the Pokemon games, and while I'm not necessarily blown away by the idea of a sound type, I certainly wouldn't be against it. Just so long as they're creative and don't try to overcomplicate things with a new type's strength and weakness chart, I think a new type could really help to make the 7th gen games even better. So long as Game Freak is creative with this, but at the same time doesn't try to overcomplicate the new type's strength and weakness chart, I think a new type could go a long way to making the 7th gen games even better. Number 5. A new and exotic region. One thing I'm hoping for in Gen 7 is a region far more exotic and unique than ever before. Kalos, of course, was based on France, which was not necessarily bad, but could be slightly bland at times. What I think would be really cool is if the new region were based on South America. Imagine being able to go into rainforests, mountain ranges, and other awesome areas. Ultimately, the most important thing is that we have a lot of diversity and creativity in the region for Gen 7. If they can do that, it'll really help to make the 7th gen games amazing. Number 6. Balanced Pokemon designs. This one is a bit hard to explain, but let me go ahead and motivate it through an example. Consider the Pokemon Blastoise. It's a turtle with massive cannons on its back, which if you think about it is incredibly creative. Then you've got Gengar, which is a ghost type that's also a very creative concept. However, despite the unique and somewhat complicated concept behind this Pokemon, their designs are actually incredibly simple. The colors aren't overly complicated, and their shapes are pretty simple. So what I'm looking for are Pokemon more like this. Pokemon who have creative concepts and are based on interesting things, but the implementation of the concept is simple. What I'm trying to get at with this point in the countdown is that I want Pokemon that are the perfect balance between creativity and simplicity. Number 7. A better evil team. Specifically, I want a team with less abstract and more realistic goals. As in, it would be really nice if instead of trying to take over or destroy the world, the evil team was trying something more realistic like Team Rocket was in the first 2 gens. Cyrus from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum is a perfect example of what I really don't want. I actually like Team Galactic overall, but Cyrus's weird goals of wanting to create a perfect world were unclear and kinda difficult to understand. I'd rather them not mess around with crap like this and give us a more realistic but still scary evil team. Number 8. A better EV and IV system. The first thing I want is for IVs to either be completely eliminated or for Game Freak to at least make it much easier to get perfect IVs. Because even with the changes in Gen 6, it is really annoying to get a Pokemon with perfect IVs all around. In many ways, IVs are holding the competitive scene for Pokemon back from becoming really big. Because the metagame is really interesting, but it's just not all that accessible outside of simulators like Pokemon Showdown because of the EV and IV system. The EV system I have fewer problems with because it's actually not that difficult to EV train in Gen 6, but I still think they could simplify it a tad more and make it even easier to EV train. These changes would go a long way towards ramping up the competitive scene for Pokemon, which would be a huge improvement over previous games. Number 9. More choice. By this, I specifically mean that I want multiple story routes and possibly even different endings. Like perhaps to beat the evil team in the game, you can choose to do it alone or join some sort of secret detective organization. Or hell, maybe you can even join the evil team. I just feel like if they gave us more choice and more ways to play the game, it would give us a lot more reason to replay Pokemon games and would add another dimension. It would also be interesting if we had multiple choices for the gym leaders, as in maybe there are more than 8 gyms and we can choose which 8 gyms to beat. On second thought, I'm not sure how to think about that last one in specific, but the spirit and concept behind that idea is exactly what I'm looking for in Gen 7. Number 10. More interaction with our Pokemon. For starters, Pokemon should absolutely be able to follow you in this game. It was a huge bummer for me that this wasn't in Gens 5 or 6. Also, I want more ways to explicitly interact with your Pokemon. I realize that Gen 6 did improve this somewhat, but I want them to go even further. I honestly don't have too many concrete suggestions on this one, which is exactly why I'm not a game developer, but the point is that I want Game Freak to give us a system that allows us to grow even closer to our Pokemon and to really feel attached to them. Additionally, I'd like to see some major changes to the happiness system so that it's a little bit more in-depth. Make it really hard for a Pokemon to actually like us and to feel happy. And for those of you questioning what this would mean for Pokemon that evolve by happiness, well, I personally don't think that should be a thing in the first place. Regardless, the point is that I think the happiness system could be improved upon and become even more in-depth, so that's definitely one thing I'm looking for in Gen 7. Well, alright folks, that is pretty much gonna do it for this video. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to drop me a like down below and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more Pokemon content in the future. Also, be sure to let me know your thoughts on what you think Game Freak needs to do in order to make Generation 7 perfect. Otherwise, I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video.